And I was thinking, I'm going to talk about some not so fun stuff, like sick animals, antibiotic use, and possible restrictions and so on. But the good news is we're in control and we can dictate our future and our trends. And many of you also know that one of the things that can take out the joy of working with animals are sick animals, and having to use a lot of antibiotics to keep your animals healthy. And you don't really see the way out. How can I change the systems? Well, that's the answer to the question, is change the systems. So one of my passions and missions that I have professionally is to reduce antimicrobial use and resistance. And the reasons for this is not just because the public authorities say so. It's because if we're using a lot of antimicrobials in our animals, it's indicating that our animals are sick, our production systems are sick, and we need to be able to find a way to address those. So Alad and I will talk about that this morning. First we need to realize what's it all about. Well, it's ultimately about the fact that we're running out of antimicrobials to use to treat diseases. And if we don't have antibiotics to treat diseases, we're back to the times of before World War I, when people were simply dying from infectious diseases. And this is not just some journalists predicting these very scary scenarios. We're talking all of the big public health authorities. The WHO is speaking about that we're entering into a post-antibiotic era where minor infections and injuries can actually kill, and we won't have any real solutions for that. The UN is also very concerned about the overuse of antibiotics in farming because of new threats to human health. So if we're looking here at the timeline, we see here from the beginning where Alexander Fleming detected penicillin, we had a huge emergence of numerous antibiotics in the 1940s and then the 1950s and 1960s. All the time, the pharmaceutical companies were just finding new, more and more antibiotics that could be used for various bacteria, and it seemed so promising, so good. We were totally in control. Infections were no longer scary. But then the rate of detection of new antibiotics started to decrease in the 1970s and 1980s. Pharmaceutical companies were starting to struggle more and more with antimicrobial resistance. They were also struggling more and more with getting new antibiotics approved. And they started to realize we're spending billions and billions on research, and then when we're trying to put it onto the market, we're barely getting these products approved. We really can't afford to work in antibiotic research any longer. And they moved over to more lucrative medicines like heart medications, Viagra, and all of those that they could sell better. Now, so if you're looking here from the 1980s, we really had not a lot of new antibiotics coming up. In the 1990s, we had the cephalosporins emerging that proved to be very valuable, and the fluoroquinolones. But here you see, there's nothing new coming. And there's really nothing in the pipeline. It's really, that's the reality. And while this is happening, no more antibiotics being detected, we have this increasing level of resistance to all antibiotics. So this is reality. So the health authorities have determined that there are some antibiotics that are now critically important to retain, to be able to use for humans in case there's no other options. And these are the third and the fourth generation cephalosporins, the ones detected in the 1990s. You know them by the name XNL, Xceed, Naxel, and so on. The fluoroquinolones, you know those by the names like Baytril and so on, and rofloxacin, marbofloxacin. And then more recently also colistin, that's started to be used again in human medicine because of antimicrobial resistance to other antibiotics. So all of these have been deemed critically important antibiotics, and all public health authorities across the globe are now saying we should not use these any longer in animals. We need to retain them to treat our kids, to treat our future generations. And they are strongly recommended, let's stop using these. And that's going to be a major issue. Now, critically important antimicrobials are used in approximately 50% of all full course treatments in cattle in the UK, according to what I found. Alad might be able to tell us better later on. And this is something that we most probably have to cease doing very soon. If you're looking at antimicrobial use in the UK is lagging behind many other countries in Europe now that are quantifying and registering antimicrobial use. But I do see there's some high-level use in dairy production. And you may say, well, there's a lot more used in pig production and poultry. Dairy is not that bad. Well, that might be, but do you know that in the last 2 years, UK pig producers have reduced their antimicrobial use by 50%? That's way more than dairy production. We need to get started in dairy. We need to be responsible here and do our share. Even if we say that it's less than pigs, that's not good enough. And if you're looking at, there's quite a lot of injectables used. If you're looking for massive antimicrobials in kilograms, and also a lot of intramammary and dry cow therapy are being used. And in this group, we have the 3rd and the 4th generation cephalosporins here popping up again that the WHO is telling us we need to stop using. But you may say, well, that's a very small bar. Well, you see, you need such a small quantity to treat an animal also. So just by calculating the weight doesn't really give it a proper representation. So the question is, are our dairy cows in the UK healthy? Well, let's look at the statistics. Mastitis incidence on UK dairy farms, 47 to 65 cases per 100 cows per year. Many of you have mastitis. Over 30% of your cows per year are standing with mastitis. Do we consider that healthy? I challenge you to say no. Do you want less? Yes, we all want less. Is it possible? Yes, that's also possible. And the problem with mastitis is, of course, there's huge costs associated with mastitis. I think the most estimates of mastitis that I see always underestimates the real true cost of mastitis, because it really never really fully captures the loss in productivity and the loss in longevity of the dairy animal, the high level of culling we're experiencing, the high replacement rates, all goes back to these mastitis cases. And when we're talking antimicrobial use on British dairy farms, it's mastitis treatments that we're talking about. That's really what's driving it all. Some level of use, respiratory treatments in young stock, but really it's the mastitis that is driving the antimicrobial use. So that's why we need to have our focus. If we're now saying we need to work responsibly with antibiotics, what do we need to do then? We need to reduce mastitis. Because as long as we have the mastitis, we still have to treat a sick dairy cow. So in order to reduce antibiotics, we have to reduce disease. And on dairies, it's really the high-yielding dairy cow that's a lot to blame. She's not very durable, she's highly susceptible to disease, and she's really difficult to manage. I sometimes compare this high-yielding dairy cow, let's take the really high-producing Holstein. She has so much genetic potential for milk production. She's like a Ferrari. And we put her in our old barn, and we only have diesel to drive her. And what do we get? Well, she falls apart, and then after 1.5 lactation, she's dead, and off she goes. We couldn't manage her, and then we tried to treat her and keep her going with everything we've got, but she is difficult to manage. So one of the problems is the genetic selection we have for it and the animals we choose to work with. Are we capable of working with those? Because these are leading to a very high level of antimicrobial use. And then we have this very tricky period here, the transition period, the most tricky time in the life of the cow, those 3 weeks before calving until about a month after calving, when you have really nearly all of the metabolic diseases coming together, the most difficult time period. And this is really exasperating the antimicrobial use. You want to reduce antimicrobial use, you need to take care of those animals during that period. You need to prepare them for them so that they can get through it, because they have those metabolic challenges at that time. And all of these metabolic diseases are directly linked to mastitis antimicrobial use. And the majority of our antibiotics are used in this period here, and also as dry cow products. So when I looked at the UK dairy targets, I see that in the UK, we're doing a moderate reduction plan here in antimicrobial use. So it doesn't seem like the authorities are going to crash down on you and say you're going to have the antimicrobial use until next year. This has happened in some countries, like in the Netherlands, where they've actually managed to reduce antimicrobial use by 50% in like 2 years on dairies. Fantastic. But in the UK, we're doing a more moderate reduction. that doesn't mean that you have to stick to this moderate reduction. I believe that you are interested in moving much faster toward finding healthy solutions for your dairy herd. They really want to reduce critically antimicrobial reductions by 50% by 2020. I think you already today pretty much can take a decision, I'm not going to use that. And also a moderate reduction in the quantities used here. But really their target is reduce the use of intermammary antibiotics, reduce the dry cow treatments, and use more teat sealants at dry-off. Those are the critical things where you need to focus on. I actually enjoy working in different antimicrobial reduction programs. It's all about creating a healthy production system. I work with different farms, varying from pig farms to dairy farms, going in and doing antimicrobial reduction programs. This is about creating healthy production systems. I don't remove the crutches from a man with a broken leg. I let the leg heal first. And then I tell him, now you don't need the crutches, you can run again. So the idea is you go in, you do a total herd audit, you find the challenges are found inside the herd, where are your weak points? And for every dairy I come onto, there are different challenges. In some dairies, it's really the heifer production management. In some dairies, it's dry cow management. In some dairies, it is how they manage the complete lactation. So it all can vary. Some dairies have foot problems and others have not. So there's no cookie-cut solutions. There's no school book solutions. You have to be your own investigator, and you know your herd the best. But you need to actively work on this, and it really helps taking in professional advice in doing this antimicrobial reduction audit. And in the end, you're going to see it's going to increase your productivity and your profitability. And furthermore, you get to work with healthy animals, which is the joy in the dairy process. And also, actually, mastitis has an impact on the products you're producing. There's several studies looking at it on just what's the impact of high somatic cell counts on fluid milk, and they say it really even impacts the pasteurized milk. There hasn't been any huge studies on high somatic cell counts on raw milk. I hope that people that have really high somatic cell counts don't produce raw milk because it's a high risk. But even on pasteurized milk, we see increased lipolysis, increased proteolysis, and reduced shelf life. So for the large-scale industry also, it's of interest to get those somatic cell counts on, and that's why you put under pressure to reduce the bulk tank milk somatic cell counts in order to get a better value product. But if we're looking at the cheese product also, the composition and the quality of the cheese is impacted by high somatic cell counts. We have decreased fat levels, decreased protein levels, and decreased total solids in cheese. So it's all in the interest here of working on this actively and not just accepting that this is the situation. So you've all heard about the 5-point plan against mastitis, and it started in the 1960s where we had a lot of infectious mastitis going through the herds, Staphylococcus aureus and the Streptococcus, and these were really dealt with a very good focus on transmission of disease during the milking process and the milking hygiene. And back in the 1960s, there were herds with a lot of prevalence of mastitis in the dairy herd, about 100%, and we could actively reduce it. But then the more and more we reduced these infectious disease mastitis, the more and more we got what we called environmental mastitis, the E. coli, Streptococcus aureus, and these other mastitis. They're a bit more difficult to work with. The environmental mastitis require a much more holistic process to work with. You can't just go into the milking parlor and save the problem. You got to start with a day-old calf. That's where you start. And that's why this 5-point plan is not enough. And I believe that Alan would speak some more about this milking hygiene, which is absolutely essential. You have to put a great focus on this. I won't cover it more here because I only have 25 minutes to talk to you, but I will leave some more. You have to put great focus on this. There's no alternative. I'm not coming up with any new revolutionary methods for you to eliminate mastitis. You have to go back to basics. There's no cholesterol pill that will solve your problem. It's a lifestyle change. That's how it works. It took us 50 years to create this mess. It's going to take us some time to clean it up, but we can do it. But you start with a day-old calf. Heifer mastitis I've seen as a big increasing problem on many, many dairies. I see that more and more across the world, that heifer mastitis is really on the increase. And again, we have these environmental mastitis pathogens, the coagulase negative staphylococci, and these are actually very hard to deal with. And in order to reduce the heifer mastitis, a huge focus has to be put on the heifer. The calves are not a byproduct of milk, they're your future. And needs a complete shift in that. I see so many times that heifers, they stand on second-grade diets. I don't care if it's okay if they have a higher fiber diet, but you don't feed those moldy hay and moldy feed. They're your future, and you're going to set the way here for how they're going to perform in their future. If you mess with the heifers, you will suffer the consequences in that first lactation. And a lot of these heifers, they calve in, and then they stand there with mastitis the first month. And that's just a terrible struggle that you need to put a great focus on. And here, definitely look at the stress and how you're moving these heifers. You definitely need to work actively on optimizing the diet for those heifers. Don't just put them on the low lactating cows ration and think that they're going to be okay. It's not the right ration for the growing heifers. You need to see how you move around, reduce the stress levels in those, even work with the very young ones, reduce cross-suckling in the young heifers, and don't feed non-pasteurized whole milk. If you have certain diseases in your herds, you're just going to set them off to a bad start. So here needs to be a lot of focus on it, and I see that more and more focus on coming on the heifers, and people are realizing that the losses they make on heifers if they don't treat them right. We're talking thousands of pounds here on average in losses if the heifers are not correctly managed. So put the heifers in the focus. They're your future. I looked at some programs, so how can we get to this level? Because there are many farms that are working in zero mastitis, a very low prevalence of mastitis programs. How do we get there? Well, I found one interesting study here done in France by INRA, by Chassagne and Barnois, and they saw that some of these factors, these were some of these management things that dairy farms were doing when they had low levels of mastitis. Post-milk spraying, adenovirus infection for dry cow therapy, and intramammary treatments. It turned out they had few other activities on farms. Wow. So they had a meticulous herd mess, pre-calving calcium, and they also had loss and concentrate post-milking to keep the cows standing up a bit right after milking to let them dry off. Culling of cows with teat damage. Washing all teats prior to milking. They didn't use a straw yard. And then there were some other factors. Heifers, they had a humidity-protected pastures, special area for calving, very important. And also no river water access to this pasture. Now you see there's a wide range of things here that it's holistic, it's total. So this is just a few of those, and I don't have time to go in all of those. Aled will cover some more of those which are very important. But now we come to the very controversial subject, and the very critical subject is dry cow treatments. If you're treating every single cow in your herd with a dry cow treatment to prevent mastitis, that cannot be considered prudent use. A heifer that's never ever had a mastitis, if you inject her with antibiotics to prevent disease, no longer prudent. We need to move away from that. We need to definitely move away from that. We need to reduce that to absolutely just use it in high-risk cows. And this takes a very targeted strategic approach. And there's lots of resources here to help you out to reduce these dry cow treatments, and especially the dry cow treatments with those critically important antibiotics. Go home, take a look at the tubes you're using, get rid of those. You don't want to contribute to this challenge. So here, definitely working with on-farm culture systems. There's a lot of great ones that are coming out where you immediately can identify the high-risk animals. You have to do this systemically. There's you have to work with looking at the bacteriological culture. There are somatic cell counts, there are milk production, and how they're doing. And then all of you start working a lot with teat sealants. They're great to use. You can actually replace a lot of these dry cow treatments with simply using teat sealants. And Aled will speak more about the heifers and the cows environment. Again, critical to reducing antimicrobial use. I have so many places where You're keeping the heifers in bad old barns or in small areas, and it's a struggle when there's no grazing and there's no to keep. But those environments is going to lead to increased antimicrobial use, and here the environment focus on that, and that has shown to be critical. This environment. How about nutritional risk for mastitis? Well, there's some controversial issues about how much nutrition impacts mastitis. I believe that nutrition really can impact mastitis a lot. But they've seen some of the risk factors for mastitis are abrupt changes to non-protein nitrogens like urea and ammonia. Using high quantities of concentrates have been linked directly to mastitis. High energy levels in the rations. The calcium-phosphorus ratios in the rations can definitely impact mastitis levels. Poor quality silage, yes. What happens in that rumen drives that animals. If the rumen is not in balance, you have subclinical ruminal acidosis and so on, you're definitely going to have an animal that is not in optimal health. Moldy hay and silage. Do not underestimate the impact of mycotoxins on your productivity. Mycotoxins are some of the most strongest immunosuppressants known on earth. Some of these mycotoxins are so strong immunosuppressants, they're used in cancer therapy to kill off cells and so on. These are the ones that are found in our moldy silage and our moldy hays, and we're feeding these to our dairy animals. And we're going to get more and more mycotoxin challenges with these extreme climate changes that we're having all the time. So do check the mycotoxin levels in your feed. Use mycotoxins absorbents. That's a very good preventive strategy. And then there's also some other feeds which actually can contribute to mastitis, such as some of these legumes and alfalfa, they have estrogenic substances. So there's definitely a few components of the nutrition that can impact your mastitis level. And I think that these are underestimating the impact of the nutrition. When we're looking at microminerals and vitamins, there are a few of those that you need to look at in your diet that can actually help you increase the resistance to mastitis and increase the immunity. And the ones I would really recommend you to work with is selenium and vitamin E. And definitely don't go with inorganic selenium, work with organic selenium. It has a better uptake in the body of the animal and can reduce mastitis frequencies. We've seen it up to sometimes 40 to 60%, because this is one of those minerals that's absolutely essential as an antioxidant and to boost the immune system. And those two in combination, they can balance each other out. There's been some studies showing that copper can actually reduce some forms of coliform mastitis. Zinc is important for the teeth canal keratin, and also important, can reduce the somatic cell counts. And then we have vitamin A and keratin, also important. So do work with your nutritionist to make sure you have optimal levels. And don't just look for the cheapest mineral, look for the best ones. It pays off. You'll get return on investment. The organic minerals is the ones I strongly recommend, because they have a better uptake in the body and a longer and a sustainable solution. Then we have a huge challenge in dairy production across the globe today, and that's subclinical ruminal acidosis. No, subclinical ketosis, I mean. And this is very common in the modern dairy cow, because she is producing more milk than she can eat. She's just too productive. She's milking herself to death. She has higher capacity for milk production than she has for consuming the appropriate amounts of nutrients. And subclinical ketosis has been associated with a twofold increase in mastitis risks. So if you have a lot of subclinical ketosis in your dairy herd, you're going to see an increase in every single fresh cow disease on your farm. And this is because when you have a subclinical ketosis, which means that you don't see it on the animal, and it's rarely that you might see a lot of ketosis in your herd, but you might have 30-40% of your cows standing with subclinical ketosis, the animals have a lower reduction in lower immunity, because the white blood cells, they can't really eat up the bacteria and kill the bacteria. And they also have, the white blood cells don't signal as well to the other white blood cells, you need to come and help us off and kill off this infection before it gets a hold. So when I did a study of subclinical ketosis, I found that subclinical ketosis in dairy cows were linked to all of these diseases. You had 2 to 3 times more retained placenta, about 2 times more mastitis, 2.5 times more mastitis, 4 to 5 times more paresis, 2.5 times to 3 times more displaced abomasum. You saw also 3 to 4 times more ketosis, about 2.5 times more lameness. You also saw more gastrointestinal disease, and you saw reduced milk production. So this is where you have one of the biggest challenges is when you're starting to see a lot of this in your dairy herd, that it's most likely could be linked to subclinical ketosis. Do we have subclinical ketosis in the UK? Well, I work together with a company where we monitor the levels of subclinical ketosis in UK dairy herd, and I noticed that 30% of all the fresh cows were standing with subclinical ketosis. How do you know you have it? You test. You can take milk samples and just run it with a keto test in the fresh cows, or you can take a blood sample to find out where you are found, because you won't be able to just look at the animal and know it's subclinical. That's what it means. What I also noticed was when I analyzed the UK database was the smaller herds tended to have more subclinical ketosis. And what I also noted was there was more subclinical ketosis in lower production herds. So don't just think that this is a large dairy problem with high milk production. Could be just the opposite, because it's directly linked to your ability to feed the animals. And if you're a small dairy producer and you have a lactating herd size of 150, you don't have 6 rations to feed your heifers or 6 rations to feed your lactating dairy cows. And that's one of your challenges why you many times struggle with subclinical ketosis. You have lower ability to do that. How to prevent subclinical ketosis? You have to maintain the feed intake in late gestation, but you also, this is one of the most critical, avoid overconditioning cows during the late lactation and the dry period. And also avoid overconditioning your heifers. I see so many fat heifers everywhere. This is where you need to have great focus. So work with vaccinations. There are a few vaccines you can definitely use to make use of vaccines. They can help you in finding solutions for reducing mastitis. There are some good vaccines out there you can actually use for Staph aureus and E. coli, but many of you that are stubborn with other mastitis pathogens, maybe vaccination is. But again, use your herd veterinarian to work out a mastitis program. And then don't forget about biosecurity, how you're moving the animals about. And I love to talk more about this, but I need to close up right now. So your calves, which I have a great focus on, what are you feeding your animals? Feed your calves correctly. And waste milk, put a great focus on what you're feeding your animals. Many of you are using your waste milk to feed the calves. Make sure you don't feed the microbial cocktail. So all of you have maybe a task to do, maybe some you're already there. You have a very low level of mastitis and antimicrobial use. Help your peers out. And the rest of you want to find some solutions. There's lots of information out there. There's lots of people working on this actively. And we have to remember what Alexander Fleming said in 1945, already when he had detected penicillin, but he also saw that there could develop resistance to it. He said that the thoughtless persons playing with penicillin treatment is morally responsible for the death of the man who succumbs to infection with penicillin-resistant organisms. So we have to kind of do our part. But we can do our part. And we see now in countries reducing antimicrobial use, we see reduced antimicrobial resistance, and that's the good news. And meanwhile, we're going to make such healthy herds, we're not going to need it. And that's what I think is the most exciting thing, is this provides an opportunity to get a healthy herd going. So with that, I'd stop. I'd love to talk longer about it, but if any of you want a presentation, want me to help you find resources, and so I'm here to help you in any way.